This is great. I'm so excited to be back with everybody. Thank you for having me back here. Very simply, is there a handheld mic I can use, or is it the only mic? Or how does this work? Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we'll go with this. I normally don't stand behind a podium, but I may wander, so we'll figure it out. Anyway. I may move the lights in the building. This will be great. But thanks for having me back here. It's really, for me, this is very special because, for me, this is very special because so many of you I phone banked with, marched with, knocked on doors with, part of my life. Many of you actually inspired me and motivated me. Like Jolie Romaine certainly has, and I started working with, I've been Bobby Zeller's kitchen actually. That's like the best afternoon school activity. We'd write letters and phone back, and she fed me, so it was a good deal. And of course, I see Jan Elaine Kreisberger here, who I've known most of my life, and Billy, one of my very dearest friends. So thanks for having me here. And, you know, I was thinking about, as we were approaching today, I was thinking that when we talk about the new Congress, it's important to reflect upon how we got here to this new Congress, how we got here to have a new Democratic Senate in New York, and what brought it about. What was the energy, the issues, the motivation that created it. And in so many ways, it began and started with all of you. It started with Reach Out America in so many ways. It started with Josie Pizer calling me and saying she wanted to get together with a group of Reach Out America people and talk about key congressional districts to target. And I said to her, great, what's next week like? And she said, I'll be up tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning. And there I was. And it was like walking into final exams because she wanted to know the targeted congressional districts, what was winnable, what was not, what did the polls look like. So I was on the phone like for 3 hours the night before getting data from around the country about races that were critical to invest in and support. And she organized teams of people to donate online, and some actually make phone calls for the campaigns. But that's kind of grassroots activism that really defined what this year was all about. And it defines what I think our future is all about. One quick example of that. Your founder, Fran Reed, made me promise to tell the story. Okay? Fran is a very dear friend. Her husband, Gary, and I grew up together since I think we were 9. And every year, they drove out to meet me in Southampton. And we argued about where to go for breakfast. And by 11 o'clock in the morning, we figured we're never getting to breakfast. So we drove out to Montauk Point. And I noticed when we were driving out that she's bringing her clipboard with her. And she's got notes and all. I'm thinking, you know, what's going on? And so there's a place called Lunch. You ever hear of that in Amagansett? It's great lobster roll. It's a great place to hang out. Enormous. We get there at the height of lunch hour. I think, as Rita mentioned, I do TV commentaries on the different networks. So when I get to lunch, we get out of the car, there's a long line. I go up to the front, and I give my name at the door. I say, pardon for it. He says, oh, Mr. Zimmerman, please don't worry. We'll make sure to bring you in right away. Now look at him. And I said to him, we'll wait online. I'm not getting cutting in front of this line. I'll never get out alive, you know. And so he says to me, no, we're going to take care of you. I learned so much from you from those infomercials on plastic surgery. Gary and Fran were like thrilled. They were so thrilled, they were like falling over laughing. And I looked at him and said, well, I think you may be mistaken. I do commentaries from a democratic, progressive perspective on the different networks. And he looked at me and sort of whispered, you know, I can hardly see if you've had any work done at all. And I said to him, well, it's really, I haven't done any work. To which Fran then jumps in and says, isn't it amazing? Look at his skin. Isn't that fantastic? And so much for the notoriety of doing commentaries on issues. Anyway, so we're seated for lunch, and Fran brings out her clipboard. And I'm just having my margarita, my lobster roll, and I'm really very happy. She said, okay, let's have some names for a Luba Gretchen Shirley fundraiser. And we planned a fundraiser that many of you attended at her home. But it was that kind of energy and activism that really defined, I think, the period we're living in, that has empowered people and given people a sense of purpose and I think And you saw the turnout. This was the largest turnout in a midterm election in 100 years. The largest turnout of millennials. It was the first time that college-educated white voters voted Democratic, really at all, in a midterm election. And you saw a tremendous turnout from the African-American community. That was very defining. African-American women really carried many districts for us and for the country. And I think it's important, when you look at the results, just to analyze where we broke through. You know, it's interesting when you talk about, we always talk about it's the economy stupid. You hear that phrase, you know, since 1992. This year was different. Where the economy did the best, it's where the Republicans did the worst. If you look at the 40 congressional districts that Democrats won, the most since 1974, these were in wealthy Republican suburbs, outside of Tulsa, in Northern Virginia, the wealthiest suburbs in the country, in Northern New Jersey, in Orange County, California, which is the most wealthy, powerful Republican region, certainly in the state and certainly in the country. But certainly California, I think, is one of the top 3 in the country. But you had this pattern around the country where Democratic candidates were emerging, and many of them were not accepting corporate political donations, and it's long overdue that we all insisted upon this from our candidates. And you saw this level of activism, and not only fueled a new Democratic Congress, it gave us a blue wave here in New York State with our new state senator, Anna Kaplan. And you know, you were talking about New York healthcare. We're very lucky. Between Anna and our Assemblyman Tony Durso, we couldn't have better, stronger advocates for our communities, for our healthcare in New York State, for women's rights. And so it's still important to send those cards, primarily to say thank you. We're always on the phone finding issues to protest, finding issues to call upon for action. But when we have legislators like Senator Kaplan, that sounds good to say, doesn't it? Yeah. Senator Kaplan and Assemblyman Durso, who's now in his 2nd term, I think he's sworn in today, is that right? It's important to also say stop and thank you. We know you're standing up for us. We know you're listening, and we know you care. That's very important to keep that in mind. So that's a good example of, you know, how we got here. We got here because it wasn't about the economy. It was about standard of decency. It was about the idea of having a check and balance on a corrupt, incompetent, divisive presidency. It was about having a Democratic Congress to hold the Republican Senate in check and provide a check there as well. So these were motivating issues. And if you look at the exit polling, it's really quite stunning. 60% of those who voted, those reported in the exit polls, according to Gallup, said Trump was the issue. He wanted to make himself the issue, and the public and the country responded. They made him the issue. There was a check and balance on him, and that was very defining and very critical in that regard. And so that was a critical factor. Interestingly enough, healthcare was a critical factor. People were just fed up with the efforts to undermine our healthcare, minimize it, sabotage it. That showed up repeatedly in one exit poll after another. Think about where we were in the Affordable Care Act several years ago. Democrats were afraid to campaign on it. They made a critical mistake, by the way, strategically. They ran away from the issue rather than explaining it and building support. But if you ask Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a conservative senator, certainly a conservative Democrat, the #1 issue in his state that was important for him was supporting the Affordable Care Act. So that and the issue of a check and balance on Trump were the 2 most defining issues. And we have a new Congress. And for New York and for the country, I think that's pretty exciting. Jerry Nadler, as you know, is the chairman of the Judiciary. Nydia Velázquez is chairing economic development, which is really a fantastic achievement for her, both as a Latina, to be able to have that role. Let her ring, it's okay, you can answer, it's okay, don't worry. To have a Latina in that position is incredibly important. It's incredibly important in terms of empowerment for jobs, for building small businesses, for making sure loans are available. small business loans are responsive, because frankly, under the Trump administration, they just have not been responsive. The loans have just dried up in this so-called booming economy. And so having her in that position is critical. Elliot Engel chairing foreign relations, I think, will be very important, especially on human rights issues around the country. And then, of course, having Adam Schiff chair intelligence is going to be very defined in terms of what we want to see. So there's a lot of Elijah Cummings chairing oversight. There are really not just you're going to have people in positions of power, people who can control the agenda. That will be very important, not only in terms of keeping a check on Trump, but articulating the agenda for our country and a mission for our future. And I think it's important as this new Congress begins, you're hearing the Republican buzz on the air about all Democrats are going to want to do is investigate. They're never going to get to legislating. We cannot be defensive as we approach this. Sure, we're going to investigate. We're going to put accountability back in government. We're going to look into these issues about both the Trump administration and not just their own personal conduct and the corruption that surrounds them, but over the conduct of the Environmental Protection Agency and the lobbyists who now runs it, and the lobbyists who are working with the incumbent EPA and looking at the role of lobbyists in this process. We're going to look at climate change. I think one of the most important initiatives to come forward is having a select committee on climate change put in place. Now, frankly, I would have wanted something stronger. I wanted to have actually have subpoena power, so that was critical. We didn't get that, but we still have this committee in place and it's worth working on. And I think probably one of the most defining issues is going to be the Green New Deal. That at least will come out of the Democrats. And I'll tell you something, there is more support amongst Republicans in the Senate for some of these initiatives than I think originally we might have thought. Because if nothing else, politicians know how to count when it comes to them. They saw in the House, the moderate Republicans all got defeated, got wiped out almost universally. So you've got basically what they call the extreme right. I call them the tin hat brigade, the tin foil brigade, because they're really deep state thinkers, that's sort of their mindset. But you do have a very different dynamic in this Congress that's affected the Senate. And you can see with the shutdown that's taking place. All of a sudden now you have 5 Republican senators saying, let's reopen the government. Because they come from moderate states where their seats are in jeopardy. Tom Tillis from North Carolina, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, Cory Gardner from Colorado, Susan Collins from Maine. Good luck for her. Good luck with her surviving. So you've got swing senators now that are starting to put pressure on the leadership, and I think that's going to be very critical. The most important focus right now in this new Congress has got to be to reopen the government. But to reopen the government based around logic, based around facts, and reopen the government to make sure that we're not, in fact, being blackmailed into reopening the government. By that I mean very simply, you have, I think, Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer took very clear and strong positions. And I think important positions. It's worth noting, a year ago in the last Congress, the Republicans and Democrats appropriated $1.6 billion to the Trump administration for border security. That was in the last Congress. They spent 6% of it. 6%. And now they're coming back for more money, the argument being now for a wall. Just for the record, this shouldn't shock any of you. The Trump administration's projected no budget for this wall, no plans for how to build a wall, no strategy as to who's to oversee the wall and maintain it. They just want money for a wall. They literally presented no plan to get this done. They had 2 years to do this, by the way, to build a wall. And of course, they've also presented no plans to deal with the real issues of border security. And by that I mean, if you look at the way drugs are coming into our country, they're not flowing in through children on the southern border. They're coming in through legal ports of entry. This is according to the Trump administration. They're coming in through airports. They're coming in through harbors. They're coming in through mail. In fact, China basically is the major packages of fentanyl coming in from China through the mail is one of the biggest ports of entry into our country. And they're coming in through cars and trucks on the Mexican border. This administration presented no plan whatsoever to increase funding for surveillance and equipment to check the flow of drugs coming in through legal ports of entry. You saw, maybe you may have seen the president's speech last night. And it was stunning in terms of the deceit and the misinformation and the lies that were being put out. And I think it's important to understand very simply, this wall is the new birther theory of the Trump administration. It's the new racist lie. And we have to recognize this, that she has no interest. I'll take it. By the way, important to me, seriously, this is not a lecture, it's a discussion. So I want you all, if you've got questions, comments, don't agree, whatever, raise your hand. Let's make a discussion out of it. Go for it.
Before I forget one thing, you said that the Democrats were going to do the new Green Deal.
Right.
But I heard Pelosi wasn't originally. I don't know, I haven't heard her say anything about that.
Well, it's interesting. She set up the select committee for the purpose of establishing what is called too often, it went from the Green New Deal to a Green New Deal, which means people are starting to backtrack a bit and slip. She's committed to doing a Green New Deal, and that's why she established the Select Committee on Climate Change. She's also trying to hold her caucus together, which is a pretty diverse caucus, from the right to the left. She's doing a good job in that regard so far. But I think you're raising a very critical point about the environment and what our standards are for Democrats, which I'm going to get to in a second. But just on this issue of the border wall, we look at what it represents. The only strategy here is to keep this issue alive for the midterm. There is no interest, no focus on actually border security. That's not been a priority of this administration. And Maggie Haberman from the Times is a great reporter. I've known her for many years, won the Pulitzer for her coverage of the Trump administration. And she made a very good point on the air recently. She said, every day that Bob Mueller's not in the news is a win for Donald Trump. And he does the distractions effectively. So as the Mueller probe is building and more evidence is coming out surrounding the issues of collusion, surrounding issues of money laundering, and in fact obstruction of justice, this has become his message. And it is clearly designed to divide our country. It's built on lies. You saw one, I'll get to you one second. You saw, it's funny, I was on Good Day New York this morning at 7:30 a.m. Give me credit, I got to 4:30, so I get some points from somebody. Okay, anyway, so we were talking about, I was on with Ed Rollins, who's a Republican strategist. I've known Ed for many years. He ran the Reagan campaign for re-election. And the first question they were going to hit us with was this question about, how is it that the Democrats are opposed to a wall when President Obama built this 10-foot wall around his home? Because he loves people inside, whatever. And I've seen this house. I remember seeing it from the street, but they're good at lying. And so I'm thinking, maybe I'm nuts, maybe I'm fact-checking it, and I looked at Ed, I said, am I missing something here? He said, just go with what you know. And so, of course there's no wall around the Obama residence. There was partially a chain link fence that was put in the back, but he's got a fence around his home like every other neighbor does in his neighborhood.
He's got a dog.
That's true too, exactly. Two dogs. And I encourage all of you, it saves a lot of time and aggravation. Go to Google, when you have a question, go to the Washington Post fact checker, which even Fox News uses, only when it attacks Democrats, I might add. But go to Washington Post fact checker, or go to PolitiFact, which won the Pulitzer Prize for fact checking. And we have more access to information, and we're not using it nearly as much. But you had a question back there, I'm sorry.
Yes.
That lady over there.
Oh,
I can't see
thank
the
you.
sound reflection.
I'll try to be loud. One fear and one question. The fear is that the Democrats will cave on the closing of the government. There's one person who was responsible for it, and I think we have to keep that message and not, you cannot cave on this. I don't mean you personally. Question. I spent a day and a half street campaigning, And my feeling is that going house to house is a waste of time, and making phone calls is a waste of time. My question is, what is a political campaign these days? How do you do it?
Okay. First, on the issue of folding on the wall, I think it really is to the credit of both Pelosi and Schumer that they've kept their caucuses so strongly together. Because I'm sure there is pressure on some of them. Let's face it, 800,000 people, federal employees, going without their paychecks. Can you all hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Going without their paychecks is a travesty. It's a disgrace. And there are shutdown stories online every day. People who are afraid they're going to miss their mortgage payment. Individuals who literally are borrowing from their neighbors or family to take care of food. And we're talking about people who do the work to keep our government functioning, maintaining our services. We're also talking about our military. Our Coast Guard's going without pay. You know, the Border Patrol is not being paid. If we truly had a national emergency like Trump is saying, the first thing any president would do is open the government. Quite frankly, he shut it down, and that includes shutting down Homeland Security, which oversees the border. It shows you what a canard, what a fraud this is. And in fact, what it's based upon. Dividing our country. It's a racist tactic, and we should recognize it for what it is. So, I think Democrats are holding out. What I'm encouraged by are the number of senators who are stepping up now, Republican senators, saying, okay, it's time to open the government. And they're feeling the heat, they're feeling the pressure, and also I think some of them are motivated by, I hope, standing up and doing the right thing for the country. So that's encouraging. But what is a campaign? Let me tell you, I have to disagree with you. Nothing is more important than direct voter contact. Yes, you've got to be on social media. Internet ads help. Communicating with your friends on Facebook is critical.
Door, absolutely, door to door.
All of that's great, and if you don't want to go door to door, there are other ways you can help. I'd say robocalls are a pain in the neck, okay? Nobody likes them. People, not too many, you have a very unusual person. You've got to have like Joy Behar on a robocall to get your attention. I'm serious. But what does work is calling your friends, doing it, what I call a do me a favor letter. You know, a lot of people don't follow the races so closely. But if they hear from you and say, hey, this is important and this is why, just do me a favor, come out to vote. Providing absentee ballot applications to people. You'd be amazed how many of your friends and their children and their grandchildren don't vote. They don't bother filling out an absentee ballot application. So those that face anything to create direct voter contact is critical and golden. Knocking on doors is essential in that regard.
No, in my experience with knocking on doors, it's a fabulous thing. People love to be asked. If they don't want to talk to you, they don't open the door. But when they open the door, they engage. They're so happy to be asked.
got elected.
That's right. Knocking on doors is critical.
I can't tell you what good response I've had when I've done it.
And I'll tell you, you go to a place like New Hampshire or Iowa, it's not just, it's considered a rite of passage. Literally knocking on the door for Al Gore in Nashua. This woman came up to me and said, I knocked on her door. She said, well, I have some questions for the vice president. I've met him twice and I still have some issues I'm concerned about. And I said, okay. Well, and I didn't know what to say. She said, well, here's my name and number. Would you have him call me? And I said, with great maturity and wisdom, okay. I had no idea what to say to her. So I called the campaign manager. I said, this woman would Al Gore to call her. He said, give me her name and number. We'll call her this afternoon. That's the level of attention they respect and expect. So it does matter. Josie.
Yeah. There are a couple of things. People here don't know, I want to add to your resume, and that I believe that you truly helped to elect Anna Kaplan. I'm sorry, I will talk louder.
She's praising me, talk louder.
I am praising you because you've been patient, you've been thorough, and very giving and generous of your time. And what I want to say is, I believe that you have helped to elect Anna Kaplan because when I spoke to you, you made a phone call to the state Democratic person to cut loose some money so she could do certain things in Nassau County to get out the vote. And I really want to thank you for that, and I want to do it publicly. And I also want to say that this is a man that listens, and he tries to do what you ask. So don't be shy. Call his chief of staff.
Thank you, Josie.
I have two other things to say. You might not be so happy with me. So that's a personal opinion, and in fact, the people here should know. And we will be, I'm sure, Reach Out America will be calling you in the next several months to say, and who do you think should be targeted? Because the senatorial race is ours to lose in 2020. We have to win a lot of those seats. I would like to say, opinion, I think Schumer and Pelosi need another message. I think they need to be the head of the slinky and start to pull their populations and the people who vote in not just Medicare, but health care for all the rights that should be, not just the wall. I know this is a talking point for them. I got 3 calls after somebody called from the bloated in the White House, was talking about, and they said, enough, I understand where we are. So, you hear somebody saying that the emphasis on the wall by Pelosi and Schumer is not necessarily important, nor does it advance the conversation at all. That's number one. And then I have a question. What do you feel are the most important issues for us to focus on for the 2020?
Before I even get to 2020, one quick thing. Before we get to 2020, we have an election in 2019, and that is re-electing Judy Bosworth, Peter Zuckerman from the Roslyn area, Charlie Berman, receiver of taxes, Madeline Singas, the district attorney. Why am I bringing these names up? Because there are local officials, we sort of just assume they're going to be there. It is so important because I can tell you the National Republicans are on a comeback. They've got to fight to come back. They've got everything on the line this year in terms of their political organization. So they're going to be doing their job, and they're going to be out there organized, knocking on doors and mobilizing. So it's really critical that and also it's very good to keep people involved. Those you worked with last time, keep them in the habit of voting, keep them engaged. They should know that make voting by absentee ballot a regular part of their life. Make going down and doing phone banking to be something they should do regularly. So I think that's going to be really very, very critical. In terms of, I'll get to you in a second. You had a question about what are the critical issues? Well, there's, I think, a number that I look at it 2 ways. There are issues, where can we build common ground with the Republican moderates in the Republican Senate? Moderates by comparing them to whatever, they're not moderates by any standard other than they'll get what they're compared to. But where can you build a dialogue? I think there's an opportunity on climate change. I think there's an opportunity even on immigration. I worry that Democrats are being too defensive on immigration. There was a time, we had 65 votes in the Senate for a pathway for citizenship for the 8 to 10 million people who are here undocumented. We had 65 votes, we had a majority in the House. You don't even hear that come up in conversation. You hear the Jared Kushner agenda, oh, we'll do DACA, and then we'll give money for a wall. And frankly, that is not good enough. And we shouldn't be defensive. We have to go in there. Obviously, the DACA children have to be protected. That's a given. You see a coalescing around that because, frankly, it polls well. And political strategists in both parties say they can't get hurt supporting the DACA children. We have to push the envelope harder and finally demand that the 8 to 10 million who are here undocumented be allowed to come out of the shadows, get their legal protection, get their pathway to citizenship. It is a travesty it has not been done. So I think that's really, really very, very critical. But I think immigration, you'll see some opportunity. Climate change, I think you have some potential because the reality is so many, storm emergencies and weather travesties just aren't defined by red and blue states. So I think there may be an opportunity for a dialogue there because it's just such a, I hope there is. I would hope there is.
I was just curious about gerrymandering and voter suppression because that very much will talk about how electoral politics works out locally, statewide, and nationally. So if you have any suggestions for us.
Look, gerrymandering, ultimately, let's see how assertive New York is now about being opposed to gerrymandering, now that we have a Democratic Senate.
Face this way, I can hear you.
Okay, sure, okay. Okay, maybe I'm sorry, I'll walk back here. But let's see how assertive, now New York does have reforms in place to make gerrymandering a bit more independent and a bit more objective. Let's make sure we keep to that. Because now we have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic Assembly, and a Democratic legislature, a Democratic governor. I don't think too many Democratic politicians want to oppose gerrymandering as aggressively as they used to. But we do have, and I give Governor Cuomo a lot of credit on this. He put real reforms in to make gerrymandering more independent. Let's make sure we stay with that. I think that's going to be very important to consider. I think also, it's interesting. There are opportunities, talk about legislation we can work on. The Affordable Care Act, strengthening it, we may be in a better place on that position because we have a Democratic House and because it's a reality that we have to. Now, the Trump administration is doing everything they can to sabotage it. But we may be in a better position because it has become a service that so many people in our country need and so critical, especially in light of the opiate epidemic that is just paralyzing every region of our nation. That may be another place we can make some common ground too. Yes?
I just wanted to say something about the inauguration on Sunday. I attended Anna Kaplan's getting sworn in. The fact that Governor Cuomo came, Schumer came, Suozzi came, DiNapoli, senators from Suffolk and Nassau County, they all talked about the fact that Anna Kaplan came here as a 13-year-old immigrant. And they kept emphasizing, as you are saying now, immigration is a very big issue. And the fact that she came here as an immigrant and it's a success to show that when we welcome immigrants, they can obtain an education and then do something to make a contribution to making this country even greater.
Absolutely.
How many people are you going to let in? A billion people? You have to limit. Would you let in a billion people?
So you touched a nerve
You
when
let
you
in a billion
mentioned
people, be like China.
the opioid situation that we're facing.
Be okay.
And I was wondering, what does our leadership in Congress have to say about the overwhelming role and power of Big Pharma when it comes to inundating the country with pharmaceuticals that are addictive and setting the stage for
Well, look, that's going to be a real test.
What's that?
That's going to be a real test.
I know it is.
Democratic Congress, in terms of how aggressively they stand up to the special interests and what they can put in place to minimize, if not reduce the special interests. I certainly think, because of the public pressure, to understand what's happening, oftentimes the issues are not, very candidly, we always like to talk about building bipartisanship and going to the house gym and sharing Pilates classes together, this kind of thing. The reality is you find common ground when you show the opposition you're strong enough to hold your ground. When you're prepared to, you make clear you're prepared to stand up and not accept, and not be hustled into a moment of appeasement, if you will. And so I think there are a number of steps Democrats have to take in terms of standing up to Big Pharma. One is how they strengthen the Affordable Care Act. Two is in terms of how we deal with treatment and addiction. And three, I think it's really very critical in terms of how we diminish and eliminate the funding and the special interest money in our political process. I think it is critical. Frankly, I think that's going to be one of the defining issues of how Democrats conduct themselves as they work in Congress and how they move forward in terms, even though Republicans will not get rid of the special interest money. That doesn't mean we should play that same political game. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to just follow up. A lot of talk is taking place now about using the funds and assets of the tobacco industry, of the new vaping companies and drug companies to actually finance prevention, treatment, and these types of things. I disagree with that approach.
Why is that?
I disagree with it because ultimately what you're doing is you're saying
Not now.
that condition is okay. We're partnering with you on it. So you create the problem, we'll ameliorate it using the funds that we can exact from you. I don't, philosophically, I mean, if morality does enter into this formula at all, I think seizing the money from illicit criminal activities, money laundering, and other flows, which are, to me, all interconnected, as we're going to find out from Mr. Mueller. That's the way to strengthen our democracy, ultimately, not by partnering with those who we've basically taken a contribution, a political contribution, in order to allow them to flourish. We have to stop this. It's way, way, way beyond historic, moment. We're way behind the curve. And I see it getting worse unless we take the right action. And we're not taking it yet. I'm not hearing it.
One of the steps that I've been strongly advocating, we change the law so we can finally sue gun manufacturers for endangering the lives of our children and endangering the lives of so many people. And finally get on the radar, we got to keep. It's interesting you say, I'm always saying when I talk to people from Republican leadership in Washington and Republican members of Congress, most will acknowledge what you're saying. There's nobody in charge. You've got an acting Attorney General, an acting Secretary of Defense, an acting EPA Administrator, an acting Chief of Staff, no one acting like President as the joke goes, but the point is, I had to throw that in, but the point is, it's an administration that is dangerously malfunctioned. You saw with Syria, the President announced his withdrawal from Syria. Now John Bolton's saying maybe we won't withdraw from Syria, but not really sure. What does that say to our allies? When our president gets up and says we fell in love with the leader of North Korea, what does that message say? What does that say to Australia, to Guam, to Japan? And so many examples of this. When he took a knee to Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, what did that reflect to what we stand for as a country? And so the first step is Shirley's INF campaign.
Use the microphone.
Okay. The first step is Shirley's INF campaign. That is critical. Fill out those cards, get those cards filled out. The second step is to hold your members of Congress accountable. Make clear to them, since no one's at home in the White House, you expect them to step up on issues like having a War Powers Act before we engage in more military intervention. And making sure, it brings up a broader point if I can, and that is, it's not enough for us to criticize the Republicans and hold the Republicans accountable. We have to have integrity in this process as advocates. So when we see Democrats who aren't showing leadership on critical issues, who aren't standing with us on defining issues in the Congress, we've got to be prepared to take them on too and speak to them. Very candidly, I've had my concerns and very public about them with our Congressman Tom Suozzi, who endorsed Donald Trump's expanding our troop deployment into Afghanistan without a war resolution, without even a definition of what they were to do. There are many people who've been to Afghanistan many times who feel you need to use intelligence techniques, drone missiles, intelligence on the ground, off-site reconnaissance to determine what's going on there. We've been in Afghanistan for almost a generation.
17 years.
We had 100,000 troops there at one point. And in fact, the longer we were there, the government of certain power lost real estate, and the Taliban grew in their power and stature. What we're doing there is not working well. So before we commit more troops there, we have to be able to ask the tough questions about what our goals are, and not just give Trump a blanket pass. And likewise, quite frankly, when you talk about abortion rights and protecting a woman's right to a safe and legal abortion, you have about 83 Democrats who want to repeal the Hyde Amendment so that lower-income women have federal assistance when they've got to make the very tough issues about whether they're going to have the opportunity for a safe and legal abortion. And Congressman Suozzi's refused to join that legislation. Or for that matter, when President Trump and Democrats rallied to sue the president on the Emoluments Clause for profiting off his office. 75 Democrats joined that lawsuit, and he was missing in action, refused to sign up for it. And that lawsuit, by the way, is working its way through the courts and is critical as part of the Mueller investigation to go in and looking at money laundering and how the president's family are illegally profiting. No, I know he has a different approach to governance. He's a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. You may have heard about them. To put it in perspective, the founders of the Problem Solvers Caucus rated Donald Trump a problem solver. So that's the group called No Labels that created the Problem Solvers Caucus. So I think it's important when we talk about issues that we care about and stand for, that we've got to make sure our Democrats also stand up on principle as well. I think it's really- And the first step in that regard is making sure that we insist that Democrats stop taking money from political committees, from political corporations. Money that, in fact, many of these corporations, our members of Congress have to oversee in their committees. So they're raising they're raising money from corporate political committees, and these corporations appear in front of their committees. They have to oversee them and regulate them. And it's unacceptable. And we're going to talk about standing for a new way of doing our politics, a new way of cleaning up our system of governance. We've got to demand that our Democrats stand with us on this, and I've raised that issue with Congressman Swazi as well, and we differ. We've had some very interesting discussions along the way. Yeah, Rob?
Can I ask you about 2020?
Can you speak louder, please?
Question about 2020. The first question, Rob and I love to have these discussions. Keep an eye on governance, like keep an eye on him. Robin gave me a book on him. He's a fascinating guy, really interesting figure.
What were we talking? We did not hear the question.
Of Governor, about 2020. Inslee. The first question before you get to 2020 is, will Donald Trump be on the ballot? And you know something? It's very interesting. No one knows what the Mueller probe is doing. But those who I know who are close to Mueller all come back to me with the same message. The 5 people I know. If this were not real, he would have shut this down. He is not Ken Starr. He's not some demagogue on a mission. He's not a grandstander, but he never talks to the press. He's a serious, accomplished prosecutor. He is a professional to the very highest order. And the fact that he has not shut this down, the fact that there are already, I think, 17 campaign and administration associates of Donald Trump who have now been linked to Russia and dialogues with Russian officials. The fact that so many of Trump's inner circle, including the president himself, have lied about their relationships with Russia. And the fact that even most recently, Paul Manafort was disclosed sharing campaign polling data with a Russian oligarch. Those of you who are in campaigns know how secret polling data is. It's never given out. So, when you have a campaign manager sharing with a Russian oligarch who's also a Putin agent, polling data, it raises a lot of important questions. So my point simply is, as the Mueller probe progresses, we have to make it very clear to our members of Congress that if Bob Mueller is compromised, if he's in any way undermined, that is an impeachable offense. By the way, not that I'm harping on a particular theme, but when that question was raised of our congressman, he said he didn't want to comment on that. So we've got to make sure Democrats hold them accountable in this regard. And I think likewise, now Democrats in Congress will pass the Mueller Protection Act. They will vote to make sure that he is able to stay in his position and not be fired. And there is a majority in the Senate that supports this as well. The question then becomes, will McConnell bring it for a vote? And we've got to keep the pressure on our members of Congress and keep it. And by the way, in fairness, Congressman Swazi has committed to support the Mueller Protection Act, to his credit. So we have to keep that focus on protecting Bob Mueller. Right now, with Rod Rosenstein leaving, it leads to speculation that Mueller might be finishing his probe. We don't know. What we do know for a fact is that the new Attorney General who's coming in and the potential new deputy are publicly committed to undermining the Mueller probe. So it's important for that. Ron, you had a question back there?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, oh, no, 2020. I'm sorry, Robin, you're right. Okay, that was my dissertation on Mueller. I will, however, get to, so the question then becomes, so we don't know what will happen on the Republican side. But on the Democratic side, you've heard 20 names, 25 names. I think it's great. First of all, when we've had front runners in my party, we don't do front runners all that well. Okay, just trust me on that. People who I love and cherish, who are great public servants, who were front runners didn't win. And I love and cherish them. And I'm proud to support each one of them. We have an open process. It's like 1992 or like 1976. So wide open, or like the Republican field was wide open. What is uniting Democrats, and I see this around the country, I know it's here in this room, is there is a moral imperative to defeating Donald Trump. This is not about politics. This is about the future of our country and everything we hold dear and we cherish. So I think that is what's uniting us. Who are the names to keep an eye on? Keep an eye on a couple of folks who are not being talked about as much. Congressman Eric Sewell from from California. Swalwell, rather, is pronounced it. Swalwell, like I got it. He is very organized in Iowa, very smart, charismatic. Keep an eye on him. Number 2, keep an eye on Amy Klobuchar and Sherrod Brown. There's a real focus on how we get back the Midwest. If you look at the last midterm election, okay, Trump won the most states he could ever mathematically win in 2016. He can't win more states. Not win in New York, not win in New Jersey, not win in California, but he's won as many as he can win. He got clobbered in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And in Arizona, we won a Democratic seat for the first time in decades. So we have some momentum in the Midwest and in the Southwest. So you keep an eye on Sherrod Brown and Amy Klobuchar, interesting to watch. Keep an eye on the governors. Governor Inslee, you got me turned on to. Governor Terry McAuliffe from Virginia. Interesting person, knows the country, knows how to organize, understands grassroots campaigning and fundraising. Keep an eye on Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado. Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado. Keep an eye on him. There are a lot of interesting figures who are going to be emerging. I love Beto. I don't know what he's doing in terms of whether he wants to run or not. He's not formed any sort of formal committee. I think he's fascinating. I hope he gets in. Apparently he's going to do a road trip or something. He's apparently touring a bit, which is great. I mean, he brings an energy and an authenticity that is so desperately needed in politics today. He's a name we all know. I saw my names to keep an eye on that may not be on everyone's radar. Joe Biden is going to be he's an extraordinary public servant. Interesting, too, 2 things to be mindful of in terms of media coverage. Now, Joe Biden's run for president twice, right? He never got to the nomination either time, yet people are certainly welcoming him to run for a 3rd time, which is great. Now, Hillary Clinton's not running, but here she has run twice. She won the nomination the 2nd time, won the popular vote by 3 million, and people are saying she has no right to run again. I think that's nonsense. I think it's misogynistic. I think it's wrong. And I think it's all too a problem with the media coverage of our politics today. Elizabeth Warren gets in the race, and the first article you read is, she likable enough? You know? I don't remember ever reading one article about a man running for president where they raised that question. Ever.
Ted Cruz.
Huh? No, it wasn't a question, it was a given. He was not likable enough. And then Lindsey Graham famously said, if he was murdered on the floor of the U.S. Senate, there'd be 99 suspects. But I think we have to be very mindful of the media coverage and what they put off early on as news stories, which are nothing more than just slanderous spin. Okay? And I think we have to be very careful about that. Yes? Interesting, he gets a lot of points. Mitch Landrieu of Louisiana. He gets a lot of points for the way he's handled racial division in his city, the way he's united the city, the way he dealt with the tension over Confederate monuments. He gets a lot of credit for being a very effective mayor. Louisiana is a city that requires a lot of vetting, though, in a presidential campaign. So, it's a tough city. So there'll be a lot of vetting, but he's a very powerful spokesperson. Gets a lot of credit. But the point is, I hope everyone's enthused about a lot of candidates running. See how it plays out. But get involved, get your pick. You can change your mind, it's okay. And if you like someone really a lot, think about becoming a delegate for that candidate. Why not? Check it out. It's a hard process, but it's kind of fun to be involved with it. Yes, you have a question.
Don't you think it should be a limit on how much money you could spend for an election? It's very unfair. I mean, whoever has more money usually wins.
Actually, not so much.
Really?
If you look at the last midterm, we were grossly outspent. And we, in fact, won. And you never got an accurate number on the numbers. Trump did not outspend the Democrats in 2000. It's hard to gauge it with super PACs. Look, as far as I'm concerned, I want public financing of campaigns. I want to abolish super PACs.
Well, I think there'd be a limit on what you could spend. It's not fair.
Well, there should be campaign, oh, absolutely, there should be
A limit
fundraising
on what you
limits,
spend for
how
each
much one
office.
can give. There are limits, but the ceilings are very high. So I'm for radical campaign finance reform. I'm for insisting that Democratic candidates, not to say about Republicans, but Democrats who are running should not accept corporate political donations. It undermines their credibility before they even begin.
Shouldn't we be getting rid of Citizens United?
You know, I wish I could, I can't get rid of
No, I
citizens.
mean, we should be working. I know that I did aim high literature.
Thank you,
All
Robin.
the time, you know, to support and Citizens United.
Everybody who's running for office is going to tell you they're against super PACs. They're against Citizens United. They want to clean up the political process. They don't believe in taking corporate political donations. And then, if you push them on it, well, you know, it's available and the other guy's going to take it, so why shouldn't I take it? I know, and he was wrong. And the first person to give a speech for campaign finance reform that I worked on, first presidential candidate was Al Gore, when he called for public financing of campaigns. Very proud of him for doing that, very proud of being part of that. But it is, to me, one of the most defining issues in our country today. It's only going to change when the courts change. That's the reality, because it's the courts that ruled, that throughout the McCain-Feingold reforms and created Citizens United. There were pretty strict reforms in place. Now, Citizens United, the court ruling in favor of Citizens United, which allowed super PACs and unlimited, unreported money, has paralyzed our democracy, put it up for auction. Yes, Ron, you have a question?
Yeah, in terms of the presidential race in 2020, I like Joe. Okay, I think
Okay. I do too.
I think Joe knows. Joe knows a lot.
Okay.
I mean, he was head of judiciary and he formed the White House Conference for Drug-Free America, and then joined all the agencies, on the drug effort. Didn't go much further than that, but that's another story. What I was really asking in my mind, before you started with the 2020 race, what do you hear about our Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Wilbur Ross, who worked in the Cyprus Bank and I think shoveled a lot of money Trump's way before he was tapped as the Commerce Secretary?
I've not
And
heard
why
those
is-
rumors. I think Wilbur's going to have to answer questions about the
But he
census.
isn't even on the radar, with the exception of a mention last week by Rachel
I happen to think if it's legitimate and it's a real story, they'll be asking questions.
You don't
about
think
how-
it's real?
I don't know.
I
don't know.
think we should just have one or two questions.
Okay. I don't know the background on that.
Thanks.
So just one or two more, okay?
But I think he's going to have to ask some tough questions with the census. Okay, yes. I think it's going to be very, very hard to keep that Mueller report under wraps. To me, that's the ultimate obstruction of justice. And I can't imagine it won't leak out. He'll be called in front of the House Democrats to testify. I assure that testimony will be in public. I think it'd be very, very hard. Now, they're going to try to sequester it. They're going to try to claim executive privilege. They're going to do what they can to maybe release some of it, not all of it. And we're going to have to keep the pressure on, but I feel it's very hard to contain it. And frankly, there are certain bottom lines here. You know, it's perfectly appropriate for Democrats to say we don't want to look at impeachment until the Mueller probe is done, until Democrats do their own oversight. I think that's correct and the proper way to do it. But there are certain tripwires where if people cross that line, then I think impeachment should be on the table. For example, trying to conceal the Mueller report, or for that matter, trying to compromise Bob Mueller's investigation or remove him. Then I think that's an impeachable offense to me.
Okay, just one more. if there's-
One more? I see, two more. Go ahead, Karen, you then, okay?
So two quick points. One on immigration, the mistake the Democrats made was to require citizenship instead of just requiring legalization. Second point, on gun control, why don't the federal government should do what the anti-abortion people do and simply make access to guns and ammunition be able to do is stop or investigate or give oversight. Will people be so frustrated and so tired out that they don't turn out? No.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Let me just say, Karen, I've known you a long time. That was one of your shorter questions, first of all. But second, let me be clear with you. You saw the level of energy from Democrats in this midterm. It's only going to accelerate 2 years from now. It is imperative. And so I think that's fine. One other point I do want to take exception with you on. I do not believe we can say to 8 to 10 million people who are contributing to our society, contributing to our country, contributing to our economy, will give you some legal cover. I think it's imperative they have a pathway to citizenship. We've got to bring them out of the shadows. They should not be, and I talk to many of these folks, they're afraid to go to their public schools. They're afraid to go to the hospitals because of ICE. They're afraid to go into public schools. They're afraid to be in the community for fear of being rounded up. Or God forbid there's a taillight broke in their car. It is, that's right, or deliver pizza. That's right. In fact, it's interesting. A friend of mine who works in the soccer industry told me that after that pizza arrest, attendance in soccer stadiums dropped by like a third to a half. People are just afraid to go to soccer games. It is no way for people. It's not American. In fact, if anything, these people make a greater contribution to our society than Donald Trump does.
I'm concerned about the fact that not enough people are affected by the shutting down.
By the what?
If we stop the airports, if we stop something like that, everyone would be affected. And do you think there's going to be any constraints on campaign literature or going out and misinformation?
You know, it's interesting. First of all, regarding how are people being impacted, there's so many ways people are being impacted that are not being reported. Trying to get a small business loan is just...
I'm talking about the national security part.
Yeah, in terms of national security, you're seeing now at the airports, more TSA employees are now taking time off from their jobs and getting another job to pay the bills. So we're going to see and experience more delays at our airports and through mass transit too, I'm afraid. You're going to see you're going to see Border Patrol agents, sadly, not be available as regularly because of the layoffs. They've got to find other ways to make an income. So it's going to impact, it's going to get into the mainstream of society. I am hoping, and I've got reason to believe, that the Republicans recognize this is not, the Republicans in the Senate will finally put their country first and force Mitch McConnell to stand up. I've got to believe that. And I think we've got to keep the pressure on them. You know, it's funny, I brought this up at CNN last week, and everyone in the panel was looking at me and said, that's not going to happen. And, you know, not that I'm such a great seer, but it bothered me that the media was not recognizing that it has to happen. And you've seen now 5 senators bolt. So that's,
The thing with campaign
well, it's going to be very hard. How much does he want to get into a war with his own Republican senators? I don't know. But Donald Trump, I think, will do at the end of the day. It's what he always does. He'll lie about it and declare victory. The way he lied to the soldiers and said they got a 10% tax rate, 10% pay raise, and lied to them about that. Yeah, right. And he'll just lie here and declare victory. That's
There's
it.
one incident where
That's right.
the alternative campaign literature.
Oh, campaign literature? You know something? The best oversight of campaign literature are each of us. There's no way we can prohibit literature from being printed and distributed. But we can fact check it. We can hold those candidates accountable for putting out false, and yeah, maybe not so much in the presidential, but I've seen horrible hate literature put out on local candidates. That is just not acceptable. And we should make those candidates know we caught it, and it's unforgivable. You know, you can have a philosophical difference. I vote for people I don't agree with philosophically a lot of times. But I don't ever vote for someone who's a liar. We've got to make it clear. I've done that with a few candidates. Some Democrats, I might add. It's just not acceptable. Oh, one more over here. One more over here. I'm having a good time. I'm sorry.
I had brought this up earlier.
I'm sorry?
I wish I had brought this up earlier, but what about regulating the drug companies from raising the price on a once affordable drug to something that the person can no longer afford?
You know, I should have brought this up earlier myself. When you look at topics that might be negotiated,
Good question.
the cost of prescription drugs is on the top of that list. Prescription drugs, climate change, healthcare, it's beyond a national crisis. And it should have been addressed a long time ago. And it wasn't
I
addressed.
mean, it happened to
But
me
we talked about it
personally,
earlier, I don't know if you were here earlier, but our committee talked about it. In one of our reports, it's an action it's one of the actions that we're taking, and it's ongoing. We constantly pressure lawmakers on this issue.
Yeah, it's really critical, and frankly, it's one of the reasons it's not happened is because of the role of the pharmaceutical industry in our politics. But I think it's coming, hopefully, I have to be optimistic on it, because it's so critical, so critical. It's so awesome to be with all of you. Thanks for having me back.